So we started with 3 key questions that we wanted to try and understand. The first one, how does out-of-home work? It sounds very simple, I know, but this was about going deeper than those individual campaign pieces of research that we all do so often. This was about fundamentally understanding the core strengths of out-of-home and how it actually influences people. Secondly, we wanted to understand how effective are campaigns that use out-of-home versus those that don't. And again, really important, we wanted to quantify this in those hard business metrics. Not click-through rates, not kind of those soft intermediary measures, but something that's actually hard and meaningful to a business outcome. And third and finally, how does out-of-home amplify other media? So again, that point about standing on the shoulders of giants. We wanted to explore how outdoor works with different media. Does it work with all media? Does it work in different ways? So in order to try and answer, obviously, these really ambitious questions, we needed an incredibly robust data source. The IPA have been running the Effectiveness Awards now for over 30 years, and their data bank contains over 2,000 case studies across a variety of sectors, and it provides a wealth of market data, of campaign research, of sales performance, and even of profit analysis. But the really important thing about the data bank is that it's in a comparable format. So what that means is that it allows us to actually understand and examine the type of brand, the size of brand, the objectives and the strategy of the campaign. It allows us to look at the media used, the duration and the budget of the campaign, and then importantly, those effectiveness metrics in terms of brand, in terms of long-term business effects, and also short-term sales activation. We felt that obviously by being able to look at both the brand performance, but actually also more importantly those hard business metrics, that this was actually a unique data set from which we'd be able to actually look for our answers. Now clearly the vast array of data that was in this data bank and the complexity of analysing it, we turned to the Rolls-Royce of analysts, Peter Field. For anyone not familiar with Peter, he's one of the world's leading marketing effectiveness gurus. I think it's fair to say that Peter is probably the most experienced person in actually mining specifically the IPA data bank, and therefore he was the really obvious choice, and we feel very privileged to have had him working on this project. So I'm just going to hand you over to Ross now to talk through some of the methodology.
Thank you. So with thousands of studies available within the data bank, some of which date back more than 30 years, what was our approach to make sense of all of this data in order that we could begin to interrogate it? Firstly, owing to the changes in media consumption, in particular the advent and in growth of online and social, we focused only on those studies dating between 2004 to 2016. Secondly, I'm sure you'll all be familiar with the statistic that 90% of the top 100 advertisers used out-of-home in some form. It therefore stands to reason that the majority of studies within the data bank would include out-of-home in some way, shape or form. However, given that we needed to identify and isolate the impact of using out-of-home as part of your marketing and media strategy, we needed to identify those campaigns where out-of-home didn't just feature, but where it represented a significant percentage of your total media investment. For that reason, campaigns where 15% or more of their media budget was invested in out-of-home became our power users. 15% was selected not as an arbitrary number, but as a figure roughly double that of standard out-of-home investment. These group of 55 power users were then compared to 92 instances within the data bank where there was no advertising spend across out-of-home. This gave us a really clear and demonstrable comparison between the effects of using out-of-home and not using out-of-home. And by focusing on these extremes, we were actually able to ignore all that mush and all that noise in the middle, as Peter alluded to it, to provide a very clear, simple, and what we hope is a very powerful understanding of what the role of using out-of-home has upon those brand and business outcomes that Paul mentioned earlier. Before we get into the results, though, we think it's only right to highlight some of the limitations and some of the constraints of our approach. Over the years, Peter and his colleagues have identified a range of key characteristics which act as a measure for greater effectiveness. The first and most important of these is a low extra share of voice, which is widely regarded to or outperform market share. The second disadvantage is a lower use of TV, and the third and final disadvantage for our power users is the fact that there appears to be a greater focus on short-term studies. In comparison, the sole advantage of our approach is a greater number of service sector brands. However, given that the service sector makes up approximately 80% of the UK economy, we don't actually believe that this unduly disadvantages or advantages the study one way or the other.